Greetings, Cup supporters. We have the honor of meeting today U.S. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz of the 117th Congress. She represents Indiana's 5th District. Victoria is a Christian, and she is pro-life, pro-democracy, and pro-religious liberty. She is endorsed right here in Indiana by Right to Life and has a very impressive 100% pro-life voting record while she was in her capacity as Indiana State Senator since 2017. We need more women in Congress who are staunchly pro-life and who will make the case that pro-life means pro-women. Victoria Spartz is a mom, an accomplished businesswoman, and was super conservative as a state senator. She fought to repeal needless regulations, repeal healthcare reform, improve educational outcomes, audit elections, protect our Second Amendment rights. Don't we need that with what we've been hearing from our President Biden this week? And private property rights, and bring transparency and accountability to the state government. She is the epitome of what America is all about. She was born overseas. She immigrated here to the US more than 20 years ago after meeting her husband on a train. This is an amazing story. And then worked her way up from a bank teller to a CPA, to a finance executive, to a very successful business owner. I mean, she's like the dream woman that, you know, anybody would want representing us here in Congress. Growing up in the socialist controlled Ukraine, she experienced firsthand the dark side of socialism. Living through this molded her conservative political philosophy. We are excited you are here to join us, Congresswoman Spartz.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my honor and pleasure to join you.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to try to be very concise. We've got just a few questions for you. The first, Congresswoman Spartz, is how did your early life in the Soviet-controlled Ukraine impact you and really your vision of how you'd serve the American people in the U.S. Congress?
You know, I was just thinking, I was driving to the State House one day and I'm thinking, you know, I grew up in socialist country. I saw what happens when socialist falls apart and runs out of money, and it was pretty bad. 90s were terrible in former post-Soviet times and in Ukraine, and it was Wild West, a lot of crimes, destruction. So socialism always brings it at the end. And now I, you know, spent all my mature life here. I came here after college, and I'm thinking, and now I am in the country that is just fought all of this values and for these values for so many years, and now we're building socialism. So it's like a full circle. Start from socialism, see what it is. So I can tell you what is going to be next, and it's not very pretty. So it made me very upset, and I'm awful at putting my money where my mouth is and getting involved when I don't like something. So I understand, you know, what it leads to. I understand what a misery, destruction, and how bad it is for people freedoms and opportunity. There is no difference between people around the world. We're all the same with strengths and weaknesses. What makes us the greatest country in the world? Because we have the most freedom for individual to pursue happiness in whichever way you want. And we're all different. Different things makes us happy. And I think that is extremely important to cherish, to protect these freedoms. And a lot of times we forget. And coming from the country where you didn't have freedoms, you value probably a little bit more than other people.
Yeah. And I can hear it. I can actually hear the pain in your voice because you see what is actually coming next. And it's a scary thing, you know, because I think people in the United States, they only see right here. They cannot see beyond and the implications of their actions. And I think that's why you being where you are, sitting there in Congress, you're going to have significant influence, you know, because of your business background, I believe, because of how hard you had to fight for your successes, but also because of the experience growing up, because our experiences are what help us to influence others. And so I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that we have a conservative woman like you serving us. So I want to shift focus to the Equality Act for a moment, because it attacks the sanctity of life and our religious freedoms and really the heart and soul of families. And, cup supporters, if you aren't familiar with this, there's been a lot of education lately that HR 5 and Congresswoman Spartz, you may be able to elaborate on this, because what it does is it amends the Civil Rights Act to add pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions to the definition of sex, and which basically broadly interprets that to include abortion, folks. So that is a huge issue. And then it even further specifies that pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions shall not receive less favorable treatment than other physical, conditions. So it's going to go directly to the sanctity of life and jeopardize our ability, to preserve any semblance of the protection of the unborn, because women are going to be able to claim, I'm pregnant, and, you can't, for any religious reason, you can't prevent me from having this abortion, bottom line. And then it even removes the Religious Freedom Act, right? And I'm concerned that even churches are going to be forced to hire people that don't adopt their philosophies. It's crazy. So we're concerned that it's going to be taught in schools. It could be taught in Catholic schools. All of these, philosophies that, that are trying to push things that are outside of the true biological identity of one, boy or one girl. And so it's very disturbing. So what I wanted to ask you is, it's with the Senate now, we know it passed through the House, but if you could give us any, your crystal ball, what you think the outlook is for the passage of the act. And if you don't think it's going to pass, do you think it could be layered into other bills?
Well, let me tell you, this is, when I actually spoke on the floor on that bill, I said, this bill not just concerned, but a lot of these feminists from the other side that fought for this right, that bill is anti-women. It actually has such a definitions, for gender identities that anyone can say that I just feel like a woman today and I'm going to be playing sports in the girls team. And I'm sorry, Democrats always talk about the science. Well, the science is very clear. We cannot compete, physically with men. Most of us just not built the same way. That's why Second Amendment right is very important. It's an ultimate equalizer. For women too, and it's important, to have these rights for us. But I think it's so sad for me to see that a lot of them just try to do an appeasement. It attacks religious liberty, it attacks pro-life women, and it also attacks all of the women and all of the daughters and girls we have, and opportunities for them to be able to be competitive, to go to colleges if they want to have scholarships, to be able to actually not to be hurt. You can have women, in jails get hurt because you can have some people with some, criminals with some perverse ideas to just decided that he wants to be housed with women. How can you tell? I just feel like I'm a woman today. So it actually gives opportunities for crimes, or someone who wants to get in women's shelter. There are a lot of different things people don't think about implications of this act. So I hope that Senate is going to stand strong on the filibuster issue. And it's going to remain to be seen, because to tell you the truth, I was very surprised that Democrats are willing to pass such a radical bills that really have, no the light at the end of the tunnel in the Senate, unless they know more than we do.
Right.
And that is a little bit concerning to me, because now they're talking about filibuster reform. They're talking about, because they passed a lot of bills, they didn't even try to make them somewhat nice, right? Somewhat at least acceptable to some Republicans. They made them radical. I think a lot of them are even awful for some Democrats. So that's a little bit conservative, but hopefully the Senate as an institution is going to stand strong, because if they pass all of these bills in the Senate, we just pass in the House, we will not have our country anymore. It's awful.
No, it's game over. It's game over. In government, in churches, in schools, it's it's basically throughout every aspect of our country.
And all of these bills are totalitarian. They put gun control bills, they completely federalize and they're taking control of election. You know, they have completely taken all of their liberties. And I mean, it's kind of like created totalitarian regime within the federal government to take over the states, and states have no rights, and every bill, you know, subrogates all of the states' rights. So I think it's a pretty radical views what they're right now trying to promote, and it's strange to me that they even go that way. So it's remained to be seen.
And they, to your point, you seem like somebody who wants to come across the aisle, try to work with the other side, at least try to, you know, understand where they are, seek to understand and have them understand you. But there's none of that right now. There's absolutely, they're not even hearing things. They're just bringing them to vote. You know, it's just very disturbing. And it's like we've lost our democracy. There's just no democracy right now. So I am very encouraged on a positive note by voters that spoke loudly in this election on who they wanted, a new brand of Republican in Congress. I mean, you know, they were all saying, oh, Democrats were going to win more seats, and then look what happened. And with you and these new freshman representatives and Cup supporters, maybe you're not tracking this, but I'm going to get their names a little bit off. But Nicole Malliotakis, is that?
Yeah.
And Carlos Jimenez and Maria Elvira Salazar they were all living under socialism, folks, just like Congresswoman Spartz. And you've all been quickly dubbed the Freedom Force. I love that. I'll call you the Fab Four, but you know, we are seeing, and you've talked about this now, such heavy socialist plays going on in Congress. You know, first it was the Green New Deal, and AOC, you know, she was really pushing that, you know, under the last Congress, the 117th. But now, you know, you see this HR1, folks, that's for the People Act. You know, it's basically federalizing elections and financing political campaigns. And then I think their next move, they're going to pack the courts, you know, and strip private businesses and private citizens of all their freedom, and it's going to move to government control. What's your strategy? What is going to be your strategy along with the rest of your freedom force to bring light to these socialist moves? And I think what you add value to is, what are the consequences? If they do these things, what do we think the consequences are? Can you stop them? I don't know.
Well, it's very difficult when we're in minority to really to be able to get the message out, but we have to. And we have to, as Republicans, get to be better organized and better messaging. So really we get to American people. It's very difficult because we don't have media on our side. We have social media right now, big tech, you know, suppressing people's First Amendment rights. And actually that is an issue that I'm working myself on antitrust committee. Interestingly enough, Democrats are willing to work on this issue for different reasons. So I said, okay, maybe we can find some compromise somewhere, because I always say, even if a narrow focus, if we can figure something out, let's get this moving, because realistically, being a minority, unless you figure out something you can move in, you know, in the next 2 years with Democrats, you can do nothing about it. It will work very hard to get majorities back. And that's no, I think we're in a good position, but ultimately there are some things we can try to work. And I reached out to some Democrats and I said, do you like to have like a queen on top of you, regardless who it is? Do you think it's right that our branch is let executive to be legislator? We have a dysfunctional branch. We don't do our job. Then we have president, you know, in his agencies through executive orders and through regulations legislating on our behalf. I mean, do you like that we don't have deliberation, committees, debates? I mean, we're the branch that represent the people. We have geniuses of policy and used to work in this branch, and now we go and it's like a Syrian drama, and it's like you know, wasting our time. So there is some dissatisfaction, but we have to work hard and try to convince some of the even Democrats. As, I have some regulatory reform bills I'm working on to have better oversight of executive branch, actually, with Senator Grassley. And I'll try to reach out to some Democrats because, maybe next president will be Republican. I hope so, and you might not like that too, but I think minority has to have an input too. We cannot just have an institution that there is no deliberation and dictatorship of a speaker of the House, regardless who the speaker is, Democrat or Republican. So the processes are broken within the branch, and try to find maybe some allies, from both parties to be able to reform the branch, because it needs major reform, but also try to get out and fight some fights, because we're going to have big fights coming up, and make sure that American people understand what's going on, because I truly believe a majority of Americans don't want this radical policies. No. They don't want our country to go to extreme left with socialist and totalitarian views. I think it's a very small group of people, but unfortunately, they took over the Democrat Party right now. This is just a reality. There are some normal members there, but unfortunately, they don't have a voice in their party. And that is the reality. And we need to work hard. We need to fight hard, because we have a lot of stake. We have our future at stake. And I think that's important. And we'll try to do our best and win in 2 years and actually make some real reforms, because people are frustrated with Republicans too. So I think it's important for us not just to the talk, but do the work too. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, what you're doing is so important because we've talked a lot about socialism here, and people are saying, okay, how is that, because we're, our focus is on preserving the sanctity of life and the sanctity of marriage and religious liberty. But if you do not have the underpinnings of preserving our democracy and our democratic republic, you can't even preserve the other three. And so what you're doing is defending our freedoms to have all those rights. And so that's what I'm so grateful for. I know that you're on a couple of other committees, and you only have another minute or two. You serve on the House Committee on Education and Labor, the House Judiciary Committee, and the House Republican Committee. Are there any other matters that you wanted to bring up here that are near and dear to your heart?
Well, there are a few issues, and I kind of been realistic, right? There are some issues like healthcare policies so far apart with, that with Democrats, so it's just very hard to find common ground. So I'm looking, we need to work, and we put together a lot of different groups as Republicans, try to get actually real healthcare reform that is pro-patients, pro-quality, and pro-consumer choice. And that has to change, and we have to make sure that doctors and patients decide what is better for me, not bureaucrats in DC, because healthcare is the worst thing to centralize because it's so individual. I think that's something that complicated. And as for education and labor, we're trying to look through, what we can do with higher ed, but unfortunately, it was so far apart on this issue. It's very difficult. One of the issues that I work on, juvenile justice prevention, to really deal with young kids before they get into a criminal justice system and help with rescues. I said, my chair, Democrat chair, that maybe we can agree on. Well, he's still not ready to work with me. Maybe at some point, but that may be find some common ground, because on a lot of other issues, labor issues and labor laws, we're so far apart. There is just, I cannot even figure out the way how we can come together on something, On immigration committee, I'm on the immigration subcommittee. That is a very complicated issue. I'm actually going to the border on Saturday with Democrats. They've, said that the Republicans never went with them. So I said, I'll go if you invite me. So they invited me. They didn't think I would, but I am going. Wow. And then I'm going to go next week with my Republican colleagues, because I really want to see what's going on there, because we have real crisis. We have humanitarian crisis. It's a huge problem, and we're a country of laws. We have to deal with that issue. We have an issue of big tech, as I mentioned. It's a big, issue of antitrust. So that's something I've been working on in the antitrust subcommittee. And then we have some, other challenging issues that are going to be coming up, and, in the criminal justice system, and, and issues with dealing with, spending and all of what's happening right now. We cannot have this uncontrolled spending. Unfortunately, I think very productive conversation is not going to happen right now. So some of the issues we'll have to probably have it later, but I still will try to do some regulatory oversight of executive branch, issues, to actually work with Democrats and see if I can find some support, because ultimately they should feel that we should be a functional branch, regardless who's in charge, and we'll try to work on that. And I'm working on some legislation. So it's very busy, but we'll try to at least advance some of the things.
You know what? That's excellent. I love what you just said. You are going to try to work with them regardless, because that's what the American people want. And they're going to get fed up. Victoria, they are going to get fed up. And what will happen when they see this, some of those Democrats are going to get voted out because they're not willing to compromise one iota. And so you've been very generous with your time.
Thank you.
So grateful. And I'm just going to say a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, I ask you to bless Congresswoman Spartz and all of her colleagues, that they work in accordance with your will. And I ask you to bless and protect her family and give her the strength and the courage and the hope to see through on the mission that you have called her to serve in. We ask all of this thing in your good and precious name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day. Much. You have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye now.